Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are talking the rematch of rematches. Jaghatai Khan vs Mortarion during the Siege of Terra. A spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k Horus Heresy novel, Warhawk, by author Chris Wraight. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Okay, so over the course of this week, we have discussed and debated the forming feud between Jaghatai Khan and Mortarion. How it really began at the very beginning of Jaghatai's heresy, whilst he was still reeling from the revelations and truths he received from Magnus upon Prospero. It was Mortarion who appeared before Jaghatai in that moment, and attempted to sway him to Horus's banner. Yet Jaghatai, seeing through Mortarion's lies and motivations, it was really just a reaffirming of his right choice, seeing only another attempted manipulation. And for Mortarion, Jaghatai's rejection, his stinging words of truth, well, they cut to the bone, forged a hatred that would not be forgotten. And through the White Scar's war and journey to get to Terra, we would see this feud and hatred deepen, even despite the lack of physical interaction between the two, through the losses and sacrifice Mortarion would inflict upon the Kargan's legion. And so by the time the siege arrived, the both of them had a hatred for the other ingrained within them. If you missed our earlier two conversations this week on Jaghatai's decision and his feud with Mortarion, I really recommend going back and giving them a listen first, just for a refresh on the state of mind each Primarch was in heading into this final confrontation. And if you're a longer term subscriber, you'll know I always say I really recommend reading the stories for yourself first, because I truly do believe that is the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But I really do want to emphasize it here. If you haven't read Warhawk yet, honestly, I really recommend just waiting until you have, because it's a finale to Jaghatai's heresy story that just has to be experienced for yourself. Chris Wraight is an absolutely fantastic author, and Jaghatai and the White Scar's journey is beyond good. Beyond good. And if you're one of the few that hasn't read it all for yourself yet, again, personally, I really recommend just waiting. However, anyway, I digress. So it was, the two would meet again, as they had to, as fate seemingly demanded, upon the throne world, with Mortarion taking over control of the Traitor Ground assault. He and the Death Guard would assume control of the captured Lion Gate spaceport, and the effect of the newly ascended Demon Primarch upon the world would be immense. Every being upon the throne world, save perhaps the Emperor himself, would become burdened with notions of despair. Even the likes of Malkador and Rogel Dawn. It was suffocating. And it was Jaghatai who knew he had to do something about it. That if Mortarion wasn't removed from play, the traitors would win. For while all other enemies threw themselves at the remaining defences in wild abandon, Jaghatai knew Mortarion alone would sit back and let his effect take hold. That he was the one remaining traitor brother who was not losing his mind, even despite his demonic elevation. And so Jaghatai undertook the greatest gamble and counter-offensive of the siege, as the entirety of the remaining White Scar's legion and whatever other forces could answer Jaghatai's call, launched out and assaulted the Lion's Gate spaceport. And there's an absolutely fantastic little conversation between Jaghatai and Sanguinius over the Vox before Jaghatai departs. Jaghatai expecting his brother to tell him to retreat, to fall back, but instead he tells him to ram Mortarion's scythe down his throat, that he knows he can't change Jaghatai's nature, as infuriating as it can be at times. And it's a bit of a poignant conversation, as it's clear Sanguinius fears it's a farewell, his goodbye to the Kargan, concerned that Mortarion is now beyond Jaghatai, beyond any of them in truth. But it strikes him how even here, amid all the destruction, amid all the retreating and falling back, as wall after wall fell, that Jaghatai alone was still truly thinking of victory. Not just holding out, but victory. And it gives you an idea of the Kargan's conviction. But so it was, the White Scars would assault the spaceport, and amid the fighting, Jaghatai's Stormseers would ensure he got right to his brother Mortarion. And there's a great moment as the two stand face to face, Jaghatai seeing his brother's corruption for the first time. And he just says, "Wings," and Mortarion starts talking about how it's a great gift, and Jaghatai replies about it being a corruption. Mortarion says, "Tell that to the angel," and Jaghatai just burns him with, "He wears them better." And it's just the confirmation we need that Jaghatai is the absolute king of the burns amongst the Primarchs. That and his rib on Fulgrim earlier in the Heresy are just the two standout legendary moments. But it's as the two Primarchs finally come to blows that we see why the history between them that we've been reminding ourselves about throughout the week is all important to this encounter. Impossible, just then, not to compare the present situation with that first encounter. The only time the Khan had fought a Primarch, truly fought one, with the expectation of death for one or both of them. Impossible not to recall how indomitable Mortarion had been in that empty realm of broken glass. How he had just kept on going, dogged, unshakable, cold, lethal. But it was a mistake to think back, of course, because both of them had changed so much. The Lord of Death had burst free of his old bounds, becoming grotesque and monstrous. He wore a human form only in outline now. His skinny body inhabited a ramshackle armour of corrosion and decay, a gaggle of loosely held panels and mouldy fabric, seemingly liable to fall apart at any moment. The air around him was acrid, suffused with a foulness that turned the stomach and made it hard to breathe. He was ruined and yet exalted, crippled yet stronger than he had ever been. So the old encounter meant little. Then it had been a matter of speed against intractability, and either approach could have emerged victorious. Now though, the parameters had changed. Mortarion's brute strength had grown obscenely. The warp coursed thickly through his veins, pulsing under heavily mutated skin. Whenever he moved, reality flexed around him, recoiling at the violation of natural law. His great blade displayed reflections of the hell realm beyond, its rotting gardens, its tormented flesh, its fertile pain fields. What did he, the Khan, have to set against all of that? The old prowess with a blade, some fine armour, the residue of that famed quickness. not enough. He had his hatred though. That was different from before. On Prospero, the discourse between them had been regretful as much as anything. Both of them disappointed at what was being thrown away by the other. Now his hatred was as infinite as the void. Too many had died at Catullus for it to be any other way. His warriors, his ships, his counsellor, all swallowed up by the monster before him, all owing their deaths to this single soul. The Khan had that. He had his rage. So in the mere physical terms, their first fight means nothing. Mortarion too changed now, too elevated. However, the mental aspect, in that, it means everything. The hatred that has been forged in the two of them since that first encounter, through that history, dominates this fight. And that is why it's important to know what has transpired between them. Why it's important to remember it here. On Prospero, the discourse between them had been regretful as much as anything. Now his hatred was as infinite as the void. Too many had died at Catullus for it to be any other way. His warriors, his ships, his counsellor, all swallowed up by the monster before him, all owing their deaths to this single soul. Again, this isn't merely brother against brother. This is truly personal. The pain Mortarion has inflicted on Jaghatai through the losses in his legion is bitter, and Mortarion cannot get past that earlier rejection. The scorn he felt, the judgment from his brother. And Jaghatai has to use that to his advantage, harness it here somehow, with Mortarion now even more formidable than ever before. Jaghatai has to find a way to be able to compete, because it is not a fair encounter. 10,000 years later, we'd see Mortarion defeat Guilliman in literally a couple of seconds, and that was with Guilliman having the Emperor's sword. So the odds here were truly against Jaghatai. And as they go at it, it becomes clear, with Jaghatai having to fall back first. Despite Jaghatai using all of his skill, Mortarion is simply too strong, pushing Jaghatai back again and again. And there's a key line that lets us see the realization dawning on the Kargan. The Khan was already breathing heavily. The going was hard as expected. Harder, maybe. There had never been any illusions. Even coming in prepared, nothing quite truly prepared Jaghatai for how strong and powerful Mortarion's demonhood would be. And Jaghatai continues to give everything he has, but Mortarion just keeps brutally wounding him, really battering him beyond anything only a Primarch could take. Yet still Jaghatai won't stop. He wouldn't give in. To endure that at all, not to be completely swept away and broken into 1,000 pieces, took every scrap of skill and tenacity the Khan still possessed. By that point, he was fighting beyond anything he had ever achieved before, scraping the boundaries of the possible, and still he was being battered, bruised, hammered, driven across the storm-racked port's edge like a churl being beaten by his lord. His head rang from the blows, clouded with blood puffs as his skull rattled in his helm. His right arm was fractured, his flank lacerated, his cheek shattered. Silence swung around him like the wheeling stars, its length crackling with vicious energies, both faster than the warp's snarl and heavier than a star's heart. "You know nothing," Mortarion snarled, rearing up again, his cloaks whipping about him as the storm surge howled. "Nothing of sacrifice, nothing of denial. You were the spoiled child, whining about the need for structure as the rest of us built an empire." Mortarion's eyes flared with a maddened green tinge, his visible face twisted into a true rage now. He was elemental. He was apocalyptic. He was phenomenal. The tempest shrieked around him, hurled into a vortex that amplified every killer strike, tearing up the ground they scored across and sending its remnants slamming and blasting across the Khan's retreating form. "You were shown the nature of the galaxy, and you turned away," Mortarion raged, slamming the scythe down and nearly breaking the Khan's trailing leg in two. "I embraced it. I embraced the pain. I looked the god in the eye." I remember reading this and being absolutely stunned at the beating, the mauling Jaghatai was receiving. Even though you knew he was going up against impossible odds, even though you knew he didn't really have a chance, you still just expected Jaghatai to dance, to use that supreme skill and speed with a blade, to be the Warhawk, the Kargan, to laugh in the face of his enemy. And sure, Jaghatai laughs, unbelievably against the pain, but by the Emperor he is suffering, truly suffering here. Mortarion just being too much. And you have to say there's also a definite element of hypocrisy here from Mortarion, claiming Jaghatai whined about the structure of the Imperium, yet all the while he was whining and whinging about the Psychers, about the Librarius. In fact, let's be honest here, if there was any Primarch who you had to name as a whiner, I mean Perturabo might take the award, but I don't think Mortarion would be too far behind in the voting. However, the fight would continue, and Jaghatai takes yet more pain, more punishment, and it literally tells us that Jaghatai should have been dead. His body is an absolute ruin. Both arms are broken. Every rib is shattered to pieces. His skull a bloody mess. He barely even resembled the Primarch he was. Such was the devastation. But he just kept coming, amid it all, still throwing out the insults, the barbs to fuel Mortarion's anger, still somehow deflecting the occasional blow, lifting his broken body from the floor. And Mortarion's completely mystified here, dumbfounded. He can't fathom why Jaghatai has just kept coming, kept taking the punishment. But then, through his broken speech, Jaghatai reveals it. He endured. He proved he could take the pain, whereas Mortarion couldn't. Jaghatai was letting Mortarion know. He knows Mortarion gave in to Nurgle. He succumbed to the pain. And if Mortarion needed tipping over the edge, that was it. His fury turned into a blind rage. But as he went to end the Khan, it was then that the Kargan truly emerged. And then the Khan started to dance. Not with any beauty that had been ripped from him, but still with that unearthly slipperiness, that mesmerizing power of appearing to be in one place, inviting the strike, only to be a hand's width away, just enough to be under your guard and slice a piece of you away. He could still do it. He still had something left. "When we do this with our ships," the Khan growled, no longer laughing, now deadly serious, "we call it Zeo, the chisel." Mortarion swung his scythe clumsily, and missed. The Deo blade struck him again, carving a deep rent along his trailing arm. The change was mesmerizing. The Khan was still on the edge of death, just one good impact away from annihilation. But he was moving again, faster and faster, as his Primarch's physiology did what it had been designed to do. Keep him alive. Keep his blade working. Keep him in the fight. Mortarion snarled, worked his scythe harder again, feeling his fatigued muscles scream, even as his mind reeled from the realization. He should have seen through it. He should never have allowed himself to be goaded. Their blades clashed again, snarling in an explosion of mingled warp detonations, and the two of them both reeled away from the blow, barely able to keep their feet. He was damaged. That had hurt him. When the Deo clanged against the scythe again, the blood spattered freely, but it was no longer just Jaghatai's. You want to talk about goosebump-raising moments? That was it. That was the moment I was leaping out of my chair, goosebumps racing up my arms. The moment that Jaghatai began to dance. Jaghatai proving he's the Muhammad Ali of the Primarchs, rope-a-doping Mortarion into using all of his energy, luring him into the fury, harnessing and manipulating that history, that past between them, as only a brother could, as only Jaghatai could. Until Mortarion was on the border of exhaustion himself. Only then would Jaghatai strike. And it cost him to get there. It cost him everything. But it was a sacrifice Jaghatai was willing to make. A sacrifice he proved, over Mortarion, he could handle. And it shook Mortarion. It shook him, stabbing him with the element of self-doubt. Even though he was by far the bigger, the stronger, and Jaghatai was a literal walking corpse, Mortarion doubted. And in that moment, Jaghatai would give the ultimate sacrifice, leaping forward at Mortarion, even with his broken legs, willingly allowing himself to be impaled upon Mortarion's scythe, taking it right through his torso, pulling himself through the blade. Jaghatai would ensure he was close enough to sever Mortarion's neck. It would cost Jaghatai Khan his life, but he would rid the throne world of the Death Lord's presence. He would save the still fighting loyalists from the despair Mortarion inflicted. He would fulfill his oaths to all of those Mortarion took from him. It's an absolutely jaw-dropping encounter. One, if you've read all of Jaghatai's story, that's a beyond majestic ending. A true culmination to a simply beautiful story. A legacy that cements Jaghatai as one of my most beloved Primarchs. Honestly, really giving Russ a run for his money. Such is Jaghatai's story. One of the very, very best. An absolute work of art by the author Chris Wraight, giving us a true journey across the heresy, bringing that wondrous character to life. As we know, Jaghatai would be restored thanks to the intervention of the Emperor, but his part in the heresy would be over. But though this contest with Mortarion was a personal one, the repercussions of it were far greater. And you can legitimately say, as a result of it, that the Siege of Terra would never have been won. without the sacrifice of the White Scars, without the sacrifice of their Primarch, Jaghatai Khan. And there is no testament, no praise greater. But as always everyone, what do you think? What did you think of the confrontation between Jaghatai Khan and Mortarion? Were you surprised with how it all played out, with the tactics that Jaghatai employed in their encounter? What did Jaghatai prove by absorbing so much punishment? How was he able to push through it? Was it really that broke Mortarion's spirit? And was it the perfect strategy? The only strategy that Jaghatai could really have employed? His only path to victory? And does Jaghatai's victory here not get the recognition and plaudits it deserves in Imperium history? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too? But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.